Hi, Dr. Rana. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
This is exciting for me because I was telling you offline that I have not really spent a lot of time on brain health, and I'm so excited to ask you a bunch of questions. But first, we want to know more about you. So I'd love to know a little bit about what drove you, what made you want to go into functional medicine, and also give us a little update on how you're doing right now because you are a cancer survivor.
Yeah, sure. Happy to answer all those questions. I'm traditionally trained as a neurologist, and I finished my training in 2005, and I practiced traditional Western medicine for a few years, and kind of realized early on, there's a joke that in neurology it's diagnose and adios. So like things have changed over the years, but for a lot of complex chronic illnesses that we see in neurology, there were not a whole lot of tools in our toolbox. So I think we had a lot of difficult to treat things. So I kind of got the itch because of that to kind of explore what some other tools might be that I could include in my repertoire. But also for personal reasons, I think a lot of people get driven into medicine, functional medicine, because of their own health challenges. And, I was dealing with, a few autoimmune diseases, which then over a few years kind of multiplied to more autoimmune diseases. And, I had family members that were dealing with things that were kind of in my wheelhouse, like insomnia and headaches. And I just wanted to be able to offer myself more, them more, and my patients more. So I kind of got the itch, and at first I said, well, maybe if I became an acupuncturist, that would solve everything. So I went to an integrative medicine conference knowing that would cover acupuncture, at least beginner level. And I was just hooked from there. And I was shocked and surprised by how I was so taken by the diet and the nutrition kind of like education, and I kind of left there going, why didn't I learn any of this? And I was just starting to scratch the surface then, right? And I'm like, why didn't I learn any of this in my medical school training? I look back and I'm like, I put myself through medical school too. I just kind of did this extra work, extra training to get certified in integrative medicine, did training through the Institute for Functional Medicine. I did get training in acupuncture as well. And, it was really fulfilling, really satisfying. And I saw right away when I started to kind of get back into practice, because I took a little bit of a hiatus when I had my kids, that it really made a difference, significant difference. And the patients saw it, the patients appreciated it. So, yeah, I never looked back. And, I can't see myself practicing, just traditional Western medicine now, just knowing what I know.
Well,
And
it's
to
hard
answer
to,
your
yes.
and
It's
to
hard to
answer
unknow what you know, right?
Right, right. And to answer your second question, to kind of update on, how I'm doing. So as I mentioned, I kind of got, you know, attracted to functional medicine because of some of my own autoimmune issues. And those definitely got better. And I consider myself a very healthy person. I eat well, I take care of myself. But I mean, cancer can affect anybody and it can come at any time. And I was diagnosed a little less than a year ago with a cancer, a very rare form of cancer in my knee. And it made me pause, obviously. So I had to stop everything, work and exercise and everything. I had to stop. So I went through treatment last year. I had a radical knee replacement. They say it takes about 18 months to kind of get your full functioning back. So I'm still working on that. And I did have to go through 6 months of chemo, which I finished at the tail end of last year. So I'm, doing well. I am doing well. I'm cancer free. And, my oncologist, would tell me multiple times, told me that I was doing very well, that I was tolerating the treatments better than most, even her younger patients. I'm 50, and she's like, even 25, 30-year olds, like, you're tolerating it better than them. And I attribute that to, you know, my fundamentally healthy lifestyle. So I think it makes a huge, huge difference.
Thank you for that update. Congratulations on finishing chemo. And
Thank
I'm
you.
very, very excited to hear that you also think that maybe how you treated your body leading up to that really helped. So that's wonderful. I am excited for you too because you're getting into the rehab, getting more function back. That's so good. But
Yeah.
this actually leads into what we're going to talk about today because we really want to understand what's going on with our brain and the things that we can do now. Because as we get into our 50s, it's really interesting. We don't think about our brain in our 20s and 30s. We don't think about the longevity. We're just thinking about where we are. And I feel like when we moving up where we see our parents starting to suffer, we see friends' parents suffering. I think everyone, once we get to our 50s, everyone has had contact with someone who's
Right.
had dementia or Alzheimer's. But, and then just to put that aside, just maintaining good cognition for just everyday life as we get older. So, this is why I wanted to talk to you about this. I'm really excited. And I wanted to ask you first, why do you think we are seeing the rise in dementia and Alzheimer's? Is it really rising? Are we just more aware of it? What's going on there?
Well, it's definitely really rising, and it's the trajectory is just going up. They were expected to seeing just astronomical numbers of people diagnosed with it, in the next 10, 20 years. And so there are reasons for it, I believe. I did training through Dr. Dale Bredesen's Recode program, which is, training to teach people how to prevent and even reverse like early cognitive decline. And basically it was like a course that I call functional medicine on steroids. So there were teachings that there are a lot of different subcategories of cognitive decline and dementia. And so you can have, reasons relating to your metabolism. They call Alzheimer's diabetes type 3. You can have it because of like lack of what we call trophic support. So factors in the brain that help kind of stimulate the nerves and keep the nerves healthy and keep the connections between the neurons healthy. So for example, certain hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, those are trophic factors, among other things. If somebody has a history of trauma, to the brain, like traumatic brain injury, that can be a significant factor too. So there are a lot of different reasons, but I'd say one of the most underappreciated, especially in the traditional world, are toxic factors. So we are just flooded with toxins in our environment. There's really no good government regulation of toxins, chemicals that are just poured into our personal care products, our cleaning products. We're eating out of plastic, and drinking out of plastic water bottles. And so, some of the foods, unfortunately, that we eat, like some of the fish, they're swimming in toxic waters. So we end up consuming those toxins as well. So I think toxins are a huge, huge factor. In fact, that's one of the top two things I think of when somebody presents with a chronic complex condition like dementia or Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis, or overall high toxic burden, as well as undetected, potentially stealth infections that in and of themselves can produce what we call biological toxins. So if you have toxic, like bacteria or yeast or even parasites that are kind of colonized in your gut. That's why we talk a lot about gut health. One of the reasons, those organisms can produce toxins, biological toxins, and can be very inflammatory and toxic to you as an organism. But, toxins in general are something that I think of because toxins make the little energy factories in the cells very vulnerable. So these energy factories, they're like little furnaces in the cells to keep like energy production going, and they're called mitochondria. And those mitochondria are very, very vulnerable to toxic exposures, and you get a lot of rusting on the cells. Like it's like oxidative stress. I kind of talk about it like it's rusting. You get a lot of cell damage as a result. And if you are genetically sort of primed for something like Parkinson's or MS or Alzheimer's, well, then that's what loads the gun, right? But then like the trigger that kind of gets things going are all the things that are washing over your genes, like the toxic exposures, you know, things from the foods that you eat and so forth. So it's really, really important to kind of prioritize, you know, keeping your life as clean as possible when you do have an actual diagnosis on the spectrum of cognitive decline or any of these neurodegenerative diseases. So, it's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but there's a lot of reasons why we're just seeing numbers just escalate. And to be honest with you, Dr. Bredesen talks about this too, how something like dementia or Alzheimer's disease really does not lend itself well to a one drug treatment model because, they've tested over, I want to say almost 300 drugs already, and there's only like 3 that have shown to have any merit to really be worth prescribing, and they don't even work that well. So, and they are, there are other things on the rise as well that have value. These drugs, I'm not saying they don't have value, but this kind of a disease process really doesn't lend itself to a one drug model because there's so many different factors that can be playing a role when you think of the body as more of in a more of a systems biology approach, like in a holistic approach. So that's why it's so important to kind of see the body as a whole and to kind of fill in the gaps as necessary.
That was such a great explanation. And then talking about the mitochondria being vulnerable, we kind of forget all the things that are hitting at us from our food and our environment. So I'm curious if someone was going to start working early, because again, these are things that we don't think of. We don't think to work on the brain early, but well, let me ask you before I ask you that, do you think that we can be doing a lot of work now to prevent dementia and Alzheimer's? Because we still have a lot of people are getting diagnosed in their later 60s, 70s, 80s. Do you think starting in our 40s and 50s, we can be doing things to prevent it?
Absolutely 100%. And, this is kind of Recode Protocol 101 is, you need to appreciate and understand that a diagnosis like Parkinson's or ALS or Alzheimer's does not fall out of the sky. And oftentimes it takes a buildup of 10, even 20 years for these things to kind of happen. So definitely, which, if we can, starting, like you said, in our 40s and 50s, start to do things to ensure that, we're healthy, from in terms of all of our nodes of health, all of our aspects of health, your gut health, your hormones, your immune system, how well you detox, and so forth, definitely, 100%. And Dr. Bredesen coined a term that I think is just genius. He says that everybody around that fifth decade in their 40s should have what he calls a cognoscopy. And so this encompasses, a full, very inclusive set of labs, that can kind of maybe uncover some hidden things that are, like I said, gaps that we need to kind of improve that may not be appreciated at your annual visit, with your primary care doctor. But also, especially if you have a strong family history or if you are really suspecting or not suspecting, but are anxious about, forgetfulness or, having brain fog, then, having a assessment of your cognitive status to some degree. There's so many ways to do it. If you went to your doctor or neurologist, they could do like a 5-minute test where all different kind of domains of cognition are looked at. It's very simple to do. On the other end of the spectrum, you can have a neuropsychological exam that takes hours and hours that I would not recommend unless a doctor really is suspecting probable dementia. But to have some sort of, at some point in that fifth decade, a good kind of overall look at your health with lab assessment and, some like a 5-minute cognition exam.
That is really great that we can actually do that, though, that we can look ahead and find out what's going on.
Sure.
And I love that you mentioned, I'm going back to a couple things that you mentioned. We may circle back to this testing, but women in our age group are going through menopause. And perimenopause has been such a hard thing for some women with their brain health.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel like they're already in that decline. In fact, some people who don't even know that they're in perimenopause think that they're having some kind of cognitive decline.
Right.
So let's talk about menopause. What is happening to the brain? What's happening to our hormones during that time? And to cause us to be going through what we think is, we really do feel between crazy and
Mm-hmm.
kind of, we call it brain fog, but I'm going to be honest with you. For me, it was worse than that. I would be in front of people and I would almost feel, nobody said they noticed it, but I would almost feel like I was slurring my words.
Mm-hmm.
Or I would feel like I was playing word find every day. There were common words,
Yep.
not hard words, that I could not find.
Yeah.
So, what's happening to us during that time that makes our brain act like that?
So, a woman's body hormonally goes through sort of like, three phases. It's, like the pre-puberty phase, and then there's after puberty, up until perimenopause, menopause, and then there's menopause, And when you're in that childbearing phase, if you have healthy, hormone cycling, you're going to have, steady levels of progesterone and estrogen at different times of the month. They're all going to kind of cycle. That's why we have a monthly period. But every cycle, if you have a healthy if you have healthy hormones, should kind of look the same pattern. When you're entering perimenopause, kind of one of the first things that happens is progesterone starts to decline. Testosterone also, sometimes in the 20s, starts to decline for women, and women do need some testosterone. Progesterone starts to decline, and then eventually you get very erratic estrogen levels. So rather than, during those childbearing years where, it's low, right after you have your period, and then it starts to rise again, and then it kind of falls again, you have these like really erratic estrogen levels that can make you feel crazy. It can make you feel hormonal and kind of just not yourself for sure. But also the estrogen levels overall are declining, which is why we get things like the hot flashes, the night sweats, the mood swings, things like that. But in terms of the brain fog, as I said, trophic factors are very important for the brain. So estrogen, progesterone, even testosterone, they are extremely important trophic factors for the brain. So, if you are kind of noticing those symptoms, it's because your levels are falling and declining over time slowly. So and then I will also say that progesterone is also kind of nature's soother. It's kind of like nature's Xanax. So if that's a major symptom you're noticing, is that you're more moody, you're more anxious, you're sad all the time, it could be because of the declining progesterone. And there are things that we can do that are not necessarily hormone replacement related that can help kind of bolster some of these hormones. Like there are certain supplements I love in the perimenopausal phase that can help your body itself kind of boost progesterone levels. So, there are a lot of tricks and a lot of things that can be done. I will say for somebody like myself, it was quite eye-opening, the experience I went through, because my oncologist told me that I would most likely go through menopause as a result of the chemotherapy. And I was still cycling pretty regularly before the chemo. And, they do say that, you do tend to kind of track the way your mother tracked. And my mother didn't go through menopause until her late 50s, actually. So I don't think I would have hit menopause for another several years, but I definitely became menopausal for sure as a result of the treatment. And I felt it. Like, it really kind of hit me with all the brain stuff. I mean, it really did. And I think for me, it was exaggerated because it was a sudden, like, loss of the hormones. Whereas for most women, it's gradual, right? You gradually lose, the hormones, and you don't totally lose them. You still have some estrogen, some progesterone after menopause. But so it was quite eye-opening for me. And I like to share that with people, especially women that are worried about cognitive decline or feel that they're kind of more forgetful or have more brain fog. I think really supporting your hormones is extremely important.
But Dr. Rana, that is amazing. We love talking about perimenopause and moving into, being able to be done and be postmenopausal and all those processes. And you just really drew the picture for us, and I appreciate that. What's really interesting that I love when you talked about progesterone being the soother, because that is the thing that seems to help women sleep better
Yes.
when they get that back up. And this is a very personal choice for every woman, but I did choose to do hormone therapy, and I feel like it saved me and my brain and my moods and probably my husband and family too. It was, no, but for me and some of my closer friends that we talk about it a lot. It's been all over the podcast. We've talked with different people about it. So again, it's a very personal choice. It's great that you also have supplements that you can give if people are not wanting to go down that road. And everybody has a different story too on whether they can or can't and how they react. So
Exactly.
I really do honor that. I would love to talk about too, and I appreciate you highlighting that, because we want women to know that it doesn't feel normal, but it could be part of the normal process that we have to go through. So thank you. I appreciate that. I really want to go ahead.
I'll just also add personally that I also did decide to go on hormones myself. And it was at a point where I really felt like it was the brain symptoms that bothered me the most, because those weren't the only symptoms that kind of like made me realize, yeah, this is definitely menopause. But, I felt scattered. I felt like I wasn't as organized. I was forgetful. I'd walk into a room, not remember what I was there for, kept misplacing my phone. So, that again, eye-opening for me. Like once I started the hormones, it was like a light bulb went on. And, so these are things I knew, but it's great to have this firsthand experience, right?
Oh, I agree. It really does help be able to pass information on to others and be empathetic. And you're so compassionate with your people. So I think that's amazing. And this reminds me too, because we're given so much information as we're going into our 50s as midlife women. There's so much on the internet. And when we come back to brain health, we've been given diet, nutrition, exercise. So what is going on with what we need to be doing for food? What do we need to be doing with our nutrition to ensure that our brain is doing well? What are some things that you might recommend? I know that getting the toxins out, so we're kind of like, okay, we've talked about some things we need to get out and we have to detoxify, but what do we need to bring into our lives and into our bodies?
Yeah, well, generally I would say to support brain health, what I tell most of the people that I work with, there are a category or a group of foods that I love to really support brain health in general. Some of them, they probably all don't surprise you, but things like wild caught salmon, grass-fed beef, spinach is one, broccoli is one, even seaweed if you can tolerate seaweed, coconut and coconut oil, I would say, blueberries, I would say all the berries, blackberries, blueberries, all the berries. These are some top foods that I really like to encourage people to try to eat frequently, very frequently. But I would say that, not necessarily like list of foods. I would say it's more a pattern of eating. So if somebody's dealing with frank cognitive decline, because as I alluded to, they're talking about dementia being like a type 3 diabetes. So it's very important to keep those insulin levels very steady, to kind of make sure you're keeping your blood sugar levels steady. So really important to kind of watch the proportion of, carb to fat to protein. So not necessarily going full ketogenic. Sometimes as a therapeutic approach, I do suggest that for people, but to kind of keep the diet lower carb in general. So, for example, just to give you an idea, like maybe you might start your day with a smoothie that has a lot of protein and healthy fats in it and lots of vegetables and maybe some low glycemic fruits, which you'd be surprised can keep you really satiated for a long time. Or you could have, eggs with some sauteed spinach, some other sauteed vegetables. And then for, lunch or dinner, you can also, have a nice salad. You can have a nice piece of wild caught salmon or a piece of grass-fed steak or other, healthy protein. And kind of try to stay away from obviously all the processed carbohydrates. And, not to say that you can never do anything like that. I mean, if there are times for celebration and you want to have a small little treat for yourself, that's okay. But in general, I would say that it's best to kind of try to stay, in this sort of pattern of eating where, if you're hungry for snacks, you're reaching for nuts and seeds and maybe a tiny bit of dried fruit in there to give it a little bit of sweetness if you need that. So that's kind of the idea, and for some people it's a huge leap from where they're starting from. So I don't like to tell people to just stop what they're doing and kind of go from A to Z all at once. There are ways to kind of like transition to eating a different way. But yeah, so I would say it's, try to stick with some of those top foods and try to, eat have a certain pattern of eating, and also the timing of eating is important too. We can talk about intermittent fasting, but intermittent fasting is a great way to kind of support, you know, brain health for sure. Supporting something we call autophagy. Fasting does that in general. Um, if you want to maybe start your day at 10 a.m. and then finish by 6 p.m., that's your eating window. That's great, because that's like a 16-hour intermittent fast, which is not easy to do. Some people need to start with 12 hours and kind of inch up. If you can get to 14 hours and that's all you can tolerate, that's still great. But if you can get up to like a 16-hour fast, I think, there's a lot of therapeutic value in that for brain health.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I, want to go back and say I love that you brought up blood sugar and keeping that stable. You also are not expecting perfection right away, but you named off a lot of really good food. No one's starving here. They're eating just really good whole food.
Right.
And but knowing that there's life that's going to get involved, I appreciate that. Thank you for bringing up intermittent fasting, because intermittent fasting in every different conversation I have has a different purpose. Some people who are dealing with women who are struggling with their eating issues, maybe it's not a great idea, or they're having thyroid or hormone issues. Then we're talking about brain health and it might be appropriate. So I love how you also gave a lot of room on that to test it out and see how it feels. So
Yes.
I love that about how you approach things with your patients, that you're working in kind of an experimentation mode with them.
Definitely. Nobody's the same. Everybody's individual and unique, and everybody needs, like a precision medicine approach, because, exactly as you alluded to, for some people, they may not tolerate, fasting periods that long, which is fine. That's not the end all be all. That's not the only way to kind of try to optimize your health. So, but yeah, I like to kind of dip the toe in and kind of just test and see where people are at, and then kind of go from there.
I love it. Okay, so this next question, I'm probably going to have some people not happy with me. And it's funny because this episode's going to come out right after my 3-year soberversary. But everybody always wants to know, how does alcohol affect the brain?
Yeah. So, yeah, people probably are not going to like the answer there, but alcohol is not good for the brain for a number of reasons. First of all, alcohol is a toxin. So, your liver really takes a hit, so that's just for many reasons not good for brain health. It also, especially if you're drinking later at night, which is more commonly the pattern, with dinner, it's going to affect your sleep, and sleep is so, so vitally important for brain health. We're realizing more and more and more. So it's going to disrupt your sleep cycle, and you're not going to get into as much deep sleep. You're going to have more awakenings and so forth. So, alcohol, just because of the fact that it's a toxin, it just, that's kind of my number one recommendation, one of my number one recommendations, especially if somebody has brain fog or a bona fide diagnosis on the spectrum of cognitive decline or other neurodegenerative diseases. Let's get the toxins out. And alcohol is a toxin, it really is. And it's not going to help your liver to clear other toxins out of the body as well, because your liver is going to be working so hard to try to deal with the alcohol. So, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of alcohol. You know, People may argue, well, what about red wine for my heart health? And as I said, life's about moderation. And if you want to celebrate every now and then with a little sweet treat for your birthday, if you want to have an occasional glass of red wine, I'm not opposed to it. It's not something, I'm not like a do or die, so I don't have a do or die approach. But in general, yes, alcohol, I would say, is something you likely need to steer clear from, especially if you have a lot of brain fog or cognitive issues.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I have no judgment on anyone who is still drinking. I just knew perimenopause really highlighted not only blood sugar issues with it and my food behavior with it, but also my brain behavior. So
Yes.
I appreciate you explaining that we're not trying to judge anyone. We just want to make sure everybody's healthy. And okay, so leading from alcohol, this makes me think of, just because of mood and what alcohol does for us, kind of, we use it really more to come down and relax sometimes. But it made me think of stress. How vital is it for us to really be looking at stress
Hmm.
as we're looking ahead to make sure that we have less cognitive decline? And what is the relationship?
Well, stress is also so underappreciated in mainstream medicine because of how inflammatory it is, because of how destructive it is on tissues, especially the brain. Because when you have high levels of stress, a lot of people are familiar with the hormone cortisol. So, cortisol is this hormone that your adrenal glands produce to kind of help your body deal with stress. And in the short term, cortisol does some beneficial things to help you deal with a stressor. Like if in the, way back when we were running from saber-toothed tigers, it was really beneficial for all of a sudden your adrenaline to shoot up, your cortisol to shoot up so that you could run away from the offender. But in today's modern world, we are just, chronically stressed, especially in the Western world, chronically stressed from our jobs and dynamics going on socially or in your family or for whatever reasons, we are just constantly stressed, which, puts you in this pattern of like constant high cortisol because, your body has to maintain cortisol to live. And your other hormones end up dropping, like your estrogen, your testosterone, like they end up dropping because your body is trying to use all the reserves to make as much cortisol as possible. That all those reserves are being stolen to make cortisol. It's called cortisol steal. And then when you have really high cortisol all levels all the time, it's been shown that, brain tissue shrinks, especially the hippocampus, which is like the memory center in the brain. The brain tissue actually shrinks over time. So it makes you dumber. I'm sorry to say, like it really does. And I feel like it's so underappreciated in Western medicine. It's one of the hardest behaviors to get people to modify, in my opinion. I think it's much easier for somebody to recognize that maybe their eating patterns aren't so healthy and to change their eating patterns. But to modify behavior in a significant way is one of the hardest things to get people to do. I'm guilty of it too. I sometimes don't do the best job dealing with stressors, but we need to just all figure out what our ways of dealing with stress are, because meditation might work for somebody, but it might not work for somebody else. So you have to figure out what the secret sauce is for you to kind of, feel more centered on a regular basis.
That's great. And I love that you said not everything works for everyone, because I know that meditating is very challenging for me. I have to be in a really good space, a quiet room. I have to have all factors. The stars have to be aligned. The moon's got to be in the right place. All of it. So I have to do tapping, and that's how I also
That's
help my
great.
clients if they can't do the meditation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's so many different ways that we've had a lot of people on talking about mindfulness and
Mm-hmm.
getting centered and being present. Thank you. So I'm curious too, what about all the things that people are trying to do? I don't know if this helps me or not, but this year I decided to start learning Spanish. I do crosswords, I do Sudoku. I
Love
love
it.
that. I'm also a math person. I tutor math kids, so I'm always doing math. That's
Yeah.
like a little side thing to the health coaching. So, do you think those things help with cognition, doing all these games and things that we're trying to learn or novelty?
Absolutely, yes. So I highly encourage that people do exactly what you said, especially if you are dealing with cognitive issues. So brain games can encompass crossword puzzles, like you mentioned, learning a new language, learning anything new, really. And you can incorporate a lot of these things into other healthy habits. Like when you go on a walk, you can listen to a podcast and learn something new. You can listen to, a language app or something while you're walking and so forth. There are a lot of like digital platforms too that are great for, practicing brain health, practicing brain games. And they've actually, shown, there's some decent studies that have shown that it's actually beneficial to help, improve cognitive health for sure. So, yes, you want to exercise the brain just as you would exercise the muscles in your body. You want to practice mental fitness for sure, 100%.
Well, you just led me to the next question. This is one of the biggest things that I find that I think helps me on a daily basis is actually the exercise. So,
Same.
can you give me your thoughts on it? Yes, not only mental clarity, but mental health.
Yes. Exercise is like the poly pill, right? It's been shown to help everything. Every ailment I think you could imagine is benefited from exercise. Obviously, there are extremes and people that extremely exercise, like CrossFit and just like spend like half their day in the gym. And that can be taxing on the body and that can be a stressor and that can raise your cortisol and that can burn out your adrenal glands. But, exercising in moderation on a regular basis, I think, is extremely healthy, especially for the brain. So it's been shown that it's exercise definitely increases some of these trophic factors in the brain, specifically brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is so vital for keeping those neurons healthy and the connections between the neurons healthy and for neurogenesis, for development of new neurons. So, extremely important exercise in all forms. So, not only cardio, but you want to build strength and you want to work on your flexibility as well. And one interesting tidbit I'll mention is that there are some studies that show that building strength, especially in your legs, so leg strength, is beneficial for cognition. So, really working on like weight training with your legs is extremely beneficial.
That is fascinating. I
Mhm.
wonder if it's because it's such a big muscle
I
or
think
what
I
that has
think
to do.
that's the first thing I thought of too.
Oh my gosh, because that is the first thing that many people end up starting with is the squatting and the
Mhm.
deadlifting and I see that heavier in many programs than the upper body. They're
Yes.
very serious lifting programs, but that's really fascinating for the health of the
Yes.
brain. Wow, thank you for that. I would love it, Dr. Rana, if you would share with the audience. Let's say someone they're just looking ahead. They're seeing people around them that they've had issues with cognitive decline. They just want to get started doing the right thing. What are your top three kind of more simple things that people can do? It can be things you've mentioned already or anything new that comes to your mind.
Well, I can't get away with not mentioning something diet related. We've already talked a little bit about diet and touched on that and how certain foods and patterns of eating are important for your cognitive health. I would say one recommendation is if you can manage to incorporate a daily smoothie or juicing protocol of some sort that's predominantly vegetable based. Maybe some low glycemic vegetables like dark berries or green apples. You could be doing a whole lot of good for your health. And to throw in some really powerful things like broccoli sprouts, which are so just potent in terms of their potential to help boost detox, could be really helpful. So, I'm a big fan of smoothies. That's how I start my day. It's not for everybody. Somebody wants a warm breakfast. But, in terms of diet, I would say that's maybe my number one tidbit. Number two, I would say really protect your sleep, because, it's so important to understand that sleep is not just so you can wake up feeling refreshed. It's the optimal time when your brain kind of takes the trash out, kind of works on dumping a lot of the toxins, because there's a system in the brain called the glymphatic system where while you're sleeping, that system is really activated. And so it's kind of working to kind of pull a lot of the toxins that have built up in the brain to kind of, leave the brain and get kind of, flushed out into your lymphatics, and then, for you to eliminate them from your body. So sleep is extremely important. And, there's so many recommendations around sleep that could be a whole other hour, but I would say kind of top things for sleep would be 2 to 3 hours before bed. Try to avoid use of electronics, no alcohol, and try to avoid exercise around that time period as well. Lots of other things to recommend around sleep, but really work hard to protect your sleep. And then number 3 would probably also be something we touched on, which is find ways to find your center on a daily basis. So as you mentioned, tapping works for you. I've tried meditating. It's just something I really struggle with. I can't do it. My husband is a great meditator, and he always tells me I should meditate, and he's right, but I do other things. I find other ways. So I love going to the sauna, especially now with, having just finished chemotherapy. I love my saunas, and, I'll sit in it at a lower heat. It's an infrared sauna already, so it's lower heat, but I'll sit in it for the first 10-15 minutes at a lower heat and just breathe, do some breath work. So for me, that's very centering. But, whether it be finding a corner or a room in your house that you can just set up a cozy chair and just put it in your calendar that this is your me time, that you're going to go and read your book or do something very calming and centering, it's super important, especially when we're talking about brain health.
Those are amazing tips. Thank you so much for bringing sleep in, because yes, it's almost like we have to wash our brain at night and make sure we get everything cleaned up. So food, sleep, and de-stressing, that could help every part of our lives. So those are amazing
Definitely.
tips, not just the brain. Dr. Rana, where can everybody find you if they want to work with you or if they have more questions?
Yeah, so my website is the best way. It's drranamd.com, so drranamd.com. And on there you can learn more about me. I have a starter kit, if you want to it's centered around hormonal health. If you want to check out my starter kit, there's a way to kind of connect with me and, talk to me. Complimentary, if there's a complimentary call that I offer. So that's probably the best way. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Rana MD. Yeah, just reach out.
That's great. And I'll make sure to put those in the show notes too, so everyone can just click away and find you. Dr. Rana, thank you for spending time with me, and thank you for sharing
Absolutely.
more about our brain and just giving us a bigger understanding of some of the things that we really do have control of. And thank you also for really working with people as individuals and being so compassionate. I appreciate you being here.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. And for everyone out there, nourish your entire life and give yourself grace today.